Hey YouTube, today I want to talk about champion pools. So over in the JS Academy, occasionally there will be this kind of meta of problems that kind of pop up, right? Over a course of a week or 2 weeks, I'll kind of notice the same problem in several VODs, and we'll kind of have like a common problem for the week. Well, as the season dies down over in the Academy, people are kind of okay with where they're at, or, they're not really striving to hit a new rank goal because they already hit it or whatever. So people have been looking to experiment. Right? People are experimenting with their champion pool, their play style. They're deciding, what do they want for next season? How are they going to play the preseason? And this has led to a lot of people kind of talking about champion pools, right? They want to add new champions. They want to play different stuff. They want to try out different things. So we've been talking a lot about champion pools over in the Academy. So I just want to make a video to kind of discuss my perspective, my old perspective, and some other perspectives out there. So originally, I started my career as a giant advocate for being a one-trick. I thought one-tricking was the way to climb in solo queue. I thought that if you were doing anything else other than one-tricking, it was purely inefficient. And the reason I kind of had this belief was because how I started. I started League back in Season 1 when my dad was telling me to play, and I would play very casually. I would play champions like Irelia was my favorite, and then I would just play whatever else I felt sounded good. I would play ADC whenever I felt like it. I would play a bunch of other just random champions all the time. And I was hard stuck gold for 8 years straight. 8 years straight. And they reworked Irelia, and I came back to the game, and I'm like, man, I'm just not really enjoying it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to actually try my best. I'm going to put everything on the table, and I'm going to see how far I can climb. So I decided, all right, what should I do to climb? I'm like, I'm going to pick a simple champion so I can learn the game and not learn my champion, right? And I'm going to learn the game. And if I learn the game, I should climb, right? So I'm like, okay, what are the simplest champions top lane? So I thought about GAREN, I thought about Shen, I thought about Mordekaiser, and TRYND. And I played them all, and they all kind of helped me get up out of gold. And then as I was climbing, I stuck to TRYND because I realized kind of the potential I had with him. And I decided, you know what? I'm going to be a TRYND player. This champion's relatively simple, but he does have very good carry potential, and I'm going to really master this champion. And I did. And I hit Masters in a year. From that moment, it took me about 1 year of landing on TRYND to hitting Masters, right? And all of that just reaffirmed in my brain that one-tricking is the way to go. If you one-trick a simple champion, you will learn the game incredibly quickly, and the less champions you play, the less variables there are. So that was my old original thought process. Now it's changed a little bit. But before we get into what I've changed it to, I'm actually going to talk about Coach Curtis's old perspective because he was kind of the opposite. Coach Curtis, he's a really popular YouTuber. Just look up Coach Curtis. He runs a mid lane academy very similar to mine. He makes lots of mid lane videos, and he's predominantly a mid lane coach, challenger player, whatever. So Coach Curtis also started at around the same time I did. He started very, very young, back in Season 1, back in the good old days. And he climbed very fast. He was a pretty talented kid, whatever. And he became a pro player in Australia. So he's an Australian pro player. And to be a pro player, you have to have lots of champions, right? You cannot be a one-trick in pro because you not only do you not want to be bannable, right? If you're a one-trick or you're a two-trick or you only play 3 champions, they can actually just spend all 3 bans on you and know you're not going to really be a factor, right? You're going to be pretty useless. However, one-tricking also sucks because you want to be able to create different styles of team comps, right? If you only play one champion, let's say you only play Orianna mid, that means you only get to draft Orianna front-to-back wombo combos. That's it, right? Your team has no options because you have no options. So you want to create options so you're more versatile. And as he's playing competitively and professionally, he thought that was really important. After being a pro player, he actually transitioned into being a coach for that pro team he was playing for. And as a coach who's having to make the team comps for the professional games, who's having to do all these things, he's like, hey guys, you guys have to have champion pools. They have to be diverse, they have to be versatile, and they have to be relatively big. So we can actually have options, right? And all of this focus on competitive style games rather than solo queue style games, which are 2 very different games, right? And that's a video topic for another day. The difference between competitive pro play and solo queue. They're very different and they should be viewed very differently. But his competitive background made him think that everything comes down to champion pool. You need to have a good champion pool. You need to have a very structured, good champion pool. So that's where he kind of started. So me and Curtis started on kind of the opposite ends of the spectrum. Over here, I'm like, okay, look, you have to one trick and it has to be a simple champion. And old Curtis is like, okay, you have to have a good pool, otherwise you just don't have options, right? Now, note that this doesn't mean have a really large pool. Pretty much no coach believes in having a champ ocean and has never believed that, because champ ocean is just, you cannot maintain that, especially at a high level, right? Each champion you add into solo queue is like another variable you're adding. So nobody's saying play 30 champions, right? Never. Nobody's saying play multiple roles. Never. You would never do that, right? Even in games like StarCraft, nobody's saying play multiple races. If you want to climb, there's 3 races in StarCraft. You pick one, right? And you just play it. You don't play Phil if you really want to improve the game. It just adds so many variables. So even though he was a big advocate for champ pools, he wasn't saying play multiple roles and play like 10 and more champions. He's saying have a champ pool, 5 champions, all solid, that all make sense together. Okay, well, as time has progressed, both of our views have kind of came to the middle. And Coach Curtis actually dropped a lot of content about champion pools. You can check out his podcast and his YouTube channel. He talked about it pretty recently over there. There's a couple of big tenets. I still believe that one tricking is okay. I think that it's very good for solo queue, but it does have some very big weaknesses. If you want to go play competitive, it's going to suck for you. Right, and I went to go play collegiate, and I only played Tryndamere, and I only played Annie. Guess who got banned every single collegiate game of my career? Tryndamere and Annie. And then guess how bad that made my team feel? Because I had nothing to play, right? I'm like, I don't know, dude. I'm like, just pick me for you, I guess. And then I would just kind of underperform. So if your goal is to play competitive, whether that's collegiate, whether you really enjoy Clash and you play Clash all the time, or you're just playing for fun leagues, or you're an amateur pro, whatever, you're trying to play amateur grandmaster, you can't one trick. Right, and you should not one trick to climb. However, if your goal is just solo queue, there's nothing wrong with one tricking. You'll have to deal with some extra kind of BS that the champion pool guys don't have to deal with. For example, some games are just going to be really, really hard to play. This is something I have a Kennen one trick in my academy who's like, hey JS, how do I deal with tanks as Kennen mid? And it's like, you don't, right? And if they pick 4 tanks, you're not going to have a lot of agency that game. That's just something you agreed to as a one trick. You're going to have to play games that suck for your champion. And then, of course, sometimes your champion gets picked or banned. You're just going to have to dodge, right? But if you agree to do both those things, one-tricking is very good for climbing, right? You can make a lot of good progress, and you have such fewer details to worry about, right? It's really good. Okay, so one-tricking is still okay. I'm still a big fan of it. If you want to one-trick, I think it's fine. But there are blind spots that will be created, and there are problems with it. Now, having a big pool, because every champion you add to your pool adds more variables and adds more complexity. So having a big pool is also not okay, right? In my kind of coaching, I say nothing over 5, period. I think 2 or 3 is the sweet spot. 2 or 3 champions for climbing is usually the sweet spot. Anything over 5 is not okay. And if I look at somebody's OP review and I see that they have over 5 champions played, especially in their past 20 games, I'm like, nope, that is not okay. It's going to be incredibly hard to climb. So we can't have too big, we can't have too small, or there's going to be problems. I think 2 to 3 is the sweet spot. Now, with these 2 to 3, you want to have a champion pool. Champions have complexity, right? And your champion pool, your theoretical pool has a limit of complexity, right? You can't play all of the hard champions. You don't get to play Kiana and Zed and Akali and Katarina. That pool is a nightmare and will never work. Nobody climbs like that, right? Because that pool is too strong. So what you want to think about when you're creating your champ pool, you want to think about complexity, and then you want to think about how your pool adds perspective, right? So complexity is actually kind of 2 parts in its own. You have mechanical complexity and you have macro complexity, right? A champion like Annie is really simple mechanically, and she's really simple in terms of game sense. Right? Because it's like you're an assassin. If you one-shot the backline, you did your job. If you didn't, you didn't. Right? And you play around your power specs. It's very simple to tell if Annie did her job, and her job is easy to do. It's just point and click. A champion like Orianna would be a lot harder mechanically because she has that auto spacing, she has that positioning to deal with, and her job is a lot more confusing because her job is very dependent on the matchup, on the jungle matchup, on the team comps, on the win cons. So she would be an example of somebody who's not only mechanically hard, but she's also macro hard. Where Kiana would be an example of somebody who's very mechanically hard, but her job is relatively simple, right? You just have to get, or Irelia. I think Irelia is probably the best example. She is one of the hardest, highest skill cap champions in the game, but her macro is incredibly simple. Her wave management in lane is incredibly simple, right? When she has a slow push, she keeps the slow push. She tries to all in you. When the enemy has a slow push, she tries to stack up her passive. If she can't, she's just on hard defense, right? It's so incredibly black and white, but her mechanics are incredibly hard. So with those two complexities, you kind of add them up and you get a champion complexity. And that's the big kind of foundational understanding of my current philosophy of champ pools. You cannot have a champion pool of too much complexity. So if you play one complex champion, if you play Orianna, all your other champions in your pool have to be relatively simple, right? So I have an Orianna player in the academy who his secondary picks are Lux, right? And that would be a good one to add because Lux is pretty simple. Her mechanics are pretty simple and her job is pretty simple. If you're playing something like Annie, you can actually add in lots of other simple picks, right? If we have an Annie player, we could say, well, you can add in Garen, right? And then Garen mid would be a good pick. And then you could add in Twisted Fate. Twisted Fate's relatively simple, and now you have a nice, solid, simple pool. And then you could add in Talon. And now you have a nice, well-rounded pool, not only because all those champions are all relatively different from each other, so you're going to learn different things from playing, each of those champions, but also they're all relatively simple. So you're going to be able to maintain that, right? And maybe you want to add in Galio, right? And all of those would be fine. Now, there are some champions that are so insanely hard that you pretty much have to one-trick it. They're so mechanically hard and macro complicated, you have to one-trick it. So if you really want to play those champions, those would be champions like Qiyana is probably one of them. Yasuo is one of them. If you're going to play these two champions, you can really only play those two champions, right? You don't get to add, if you're a Yasuo player, you don't get to play 5 other picks, right? Even if they're simple, you have so much going on with the Yasuo, you can't really play anything else. If you're playing Qiyana, you can't really add in anything else. Maybe Kiddo's borderline, you can maybe add in some simple picks, but really, the more picks you add, you're going to have to spend just a crazy amount of time, right? So if you want to have a large pool, a large for solo queue, that's like, for me, that'd be 3, 4, or 5. You have to have simple champions, several simple champions. If you want to play one complex champion, you may only have one complement, or maybe 2 complements, because your main champion's so complex, right? So if you want to play Aura, you may only get to play Lux and Talon, right? As your kind of simple things that add. Now, the beautiful part about adding different champions is you get to add perspective to your game, right? One-tricks have a very narrow perspective because they see everything through the lens of one champion. But if you play 3 different things, you actually get to see more. You get to see more of this game from different angles, right? You get to see it as Orianna, as Lux, and as Talon from 3 completely different angles. So your game knowledge is going to be more well-rounded, even though for your solo queue, you're going to have to learn more things, right? So to kind of summarize, my current philosophy now is kind of the middle ground between my old philosophy and Curtis's old philosophy, right? I used to think you had to one-trick. He used to think you have to have a champion pool. Now I'm kind of in the middle. I think the sweet spot for champions is 2 to 3. You want to have champions that are relatively different from each other. It wouldn't make sense to play like Talon and Zed, right? Because they both have the same perspective. They would both be looking at the game from the same way. Pick Talon and then like an AP burst mage. And then that's different enough, right? Talon and Zoe. That would be good. And I think 2 to 3 is a sweet spot. And how complex your champions are influence how many champions you can have. So those are my thoughts on champion pool. I hope the end of the season is going well for you guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what you'd like to see more in the comments. I'll see you guys around. Peace.